July 9th, 1943. 06:15 hours, Rabaul Harbour, New Britain. The air is already thick with heat, pressing down on the decks of the anchored ships like an invisible weight. You can hear the low hum of generators, the metallic clatter of tools against steel, and the distant whine of aircraft engines warming on coral airstrips beyond the harbour. On the bridge of the heavy cruiser, Chokai Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka stands with his hands clasped behind his back, binoculars raised toward the horizon. His uniform is immaculate, untouched by the grime that coats the enlisted men below. Around him, officers move with quiet efficiency, their voices calm, measured, unhurried. There is no sense of urgency here. Not yet. Range reports from Buin confirm no enemy aircraft within 500 nautical miles, says Commander Hiroshi Takeda, his voice steady as he reads from a clipboard. Reconnaissance flights from the 251st Air Group returned before dawn. Clear skies, no contact. Kusaka lowers his binoculars slightly, considering this. 500 nautical miles. The number carries weight, but also comfort. It is a boundary, a shield formed not of steel or armor, but of distance itself. The Pacific Ocean stretches outward in every direction, vast and indifferent, an ally as dependable as any fleet. Very good, Kusaka replies. Continue standard patrol rotations. No need to alter operations. Below on the deck, sailors move about their duties with practiced ease. Some pause briefly to wipe sweat from their brows. Others glance upward at the sky where a handful of Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters circle lazily, their silhouettes sharp against the pale morning light. They are guardians of a perimeter that seems unbreakable. Across the harbor at Lakunai Airfield, ground crews prepare a formation of Mitsubishi G-4 Ebeti bombers. Their long, slender fuselages gleam under the rising sun, engines ticking as they warm. Fuel lines are disconnected. Bomb racks are checked. Pilots climb into cockpits with the familiarity of men who have done this 100 times before. Captain Saburo Sakai, already seated in his Zero, adjusts his headset and listens to the crackle of radio chatter. Escort formation will rendezvous at altitude 3,000 meters, comes the voice of a flight controller. Estimated patrol radius remains unchanged. Unchanged. That word again. Sakai glances at the horizon. There is nothing there. Only the endless blue. For years now, distance has been the defining factor of this war in the Pacific. It has dictated strategy, shaped operations, and perhaps most importantly, imposed limits. Limits on what aircraft can do. Limits on how far they can fly, how long they can fight, how safely they can return. The Imperial Japanese Navy has built its doctrine around those limits. Fighter aircraft like the Zero are exceptional machines. Lightweight, agile, capable of astonishing maneuverability, but they are also constrained. Their operational range, even under optimal conditions, binds them to their carriers or forward bases. They cannot wander far. They cannot escort bombers indefinitely. They cannot protect what lies beyond that invisible line drawn across the ocean. And so plans are made with that certainty in mind. Back on the bridge of Chokai, Kusaka turns to his chief of staff. The Americans will not risk extended operations this far from their carriers, he says. Their fighters cannot support such missions. Their bombers would be exposed. His tone is not arrogant. It is simply factual, grounded in everything they know. Lieutenant Commander Masato Inoue nods in agreement. Their F-4F Wildcats lack the endurance. Even with optimal fuel management, they would be forced to turn back well before reaching our perimeter. Exactly, Kusaka replies. You can almost feel the logic settling into place, solid and unquestioned. This is how wars are fought. Not only with weapons, but with assumptions, with calculations, with the quiet confidence that comes from believing you understand the limits of your enemy. At Lakunai, the first Ebeti bomber begins to taxi its engines, roaring to life. Dust and loose gravel scatter beneath its wheels as it moves toward the runway. Inside the cockpit, Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura checks his instruments. Fuel levels stable, he says to his co-pilot. We'll have sufficient range to reach Guadalcanal and return. Return, always return, because the math has already been done. The distance is measured, the margins calculated. There is no uncertainty here, no unknown. In the operations room, maps are spread across a large table. Colored pins mark positions, blue for Japanese forces, red for estimated American locations. A line arcs outward from Rabaul, drawn in pencil. It represents the maximum effective range of Japanese fighter coverage. Beyond that line, the map is quieter, less crowded, less dangerous. Enemy carrier groups remain outside engagement distance reports. A signals officer. No indication of movement toward our sector. Kusaka studies the map. Everything is where it should be. Everything behaves as expected. And yet far beyond the horizon, something is already in motion. Not a fleet, not a single aircraft, but a change. A subtle shift in what is possible. On a distant airfield, thousands of kilometers away, American engineers and mechanics have been working quietly, methodically, solving a problem that has plagued their operations since the beginning of the war. Range. The same limitation that defines Japanese strategy has been studied, challenged, and piece by piece overcome. But here in Rabaul, that reality has not yet arrived. Here, the sky is still a boundary, a safe distance, a guarantee. Sakai listens as the final pre-flight checks conclude. 0 Squadron ready for patrol, he transmits. Proceed as scheduled, comes the reply. No urgency, no deviation, just routine. He pushes the throttle forward and the aircraft begins to roll. The engine roars louder now, the vibration running through the frame, through his hands, through his entire body. The runway rushes beneath him, a blur of motion, and then suddenly lift. The ground falls away. The harbor shrinks. The ships become small, orderly shapes against the water. Above, the sky opens vast and empty. You can feel the calm, the certainty. At this moment, no one here believes that the limits they trust are about to vanish. No one believes that distance, their greatest ally, is about to become meaningless. July 9th, 1943. 8:32 hours. Operations Room, Rabaul. The first report arrives quietly. It does not interrupt, it does not alarm. It simply exists, placed among a dozen other routine messages that pass through the hands of signal officers every hour. Reconnaissance aircraft reports unidentified engine signatures beyond expected range. Bearing 115 degrees. Distance uncertain. Lieutenant Commander Masato Inoue reads it once, then again slower. Engine signatures, he repeats. The young signals officer standing before him nods. Yes, sir. The observer could not visually confirm. Cloud cover at higher altitude. Inoue places the report on the table next to a map already crowded with notes and markings. Probably long-range reconnaissance, he says. Perhaps a B-24. They have been probing further lately. He does not look concerned. Around him, the room continues its steady rhythm. Officers move between desks. Radios crackle softly. A fan turns lazily overhead, pushing warm air in slow circles. Nothing about this feels urgent. On the wall, the large operational map still shows the familiar arc of safety extending outward from Rabaul. Inside that arc, Japanese control remains firm. Outside it, uncertainty exists, but not immediate threat. The report for now belongs to that outer space. File it under reconnaissance activity, Inoue orders. Yes, sir. The paper disappears into a folder, joining others that will likely never be revisited. Outside, the sky remains clear. At altitude, Captain Saburo Sakai leads his formation of Mitsubishi, a 6M0 fighters in a wide patrol pattern. The ocean below stretches endlessly, broken only by the faint outlines of islands and the occasional white wake of a distant ship. Maintain spacing, he instructs over the radio. Watch for high-altitude contacts. His voice is calm, controlled. He has flown these patrols countless times. The routine is familiar, predictable. A wingman responds, visibility excellent, no contacts. Sakai scans the horizon. There is nothing, no contrails, no distant glints of sunlight on metal, only blue sky meeting blue ocean. Far below, Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura's formation of Mitsubishi G4M bombers continues toward Guadalcanal. Their engines drone steadily, the sound constant and reassuring. Inside the cockpit, Nakamura checks his fuel gauge again. All readings normal, he says. His co-pilot nods. We remain well within operational range. Again, that quiet certainty. Back in Rabaul, another report arrives. This one is more specific. Buin sector observation, post reports intermittent radio interference. Possible long-range transmissions. Source unknown. The signal officer hesitates before handing it over. Inoue takes it reading quickly. Interference could be atmospheric, he says, or enemy attempts to disrupt communications. He pauses, then adds almost dismissively, they lack the capability to operate effectively at this distance. The assumption remains intact. Distance is still protection. Across the harbor, mechanics continue their work. Fuel drums are rolled into position. Ammunition belts are checked and loaded. Aircraft are serviced with the precision of men who trust the system they serve. No one rushes. No one looks to the sky with concern. The world feels stable. Yet beyond that invisible boundary, American forces are already moving into positions that would have been considered impossible only months earlier. At Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, U.S. Army Air Forces personnel prepare a group of Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighters. The aircraft stand in a line, their twin booms casting long shadows in the morning light. Ground crews move quickly, attaching external fuel tanks beneath the wings, large, cylindrical, and unmistakably temporary. Drop tanks. Captain Thomas McGuire watches as a mechanic secures one of the tanks in place. Double-check the fittings, he says. We cannot afford a leak. Yes, sir. Nearby, another pilot runs his hand along the smooth metal surface of his aircraft. Feels heavier, he mutters. It is, replies a crew chief. But you will go farther than ever before. Farther. The word carries a different meaning here, not a limit, a possibility. Back in the cockpit of his Zero, Sakai hears a brief burst of static. Control, this is Zero Leader, requesting update on reconnaissance report. There is a pause before the response comes. Negative visual confirmation of enemy aircraft. Continue patrol as assigned. Sakai acknowledges. Nothing unusual, nothing to pursue. He banks slightly, adjusting his course. The formation follows. The ocean below remains empty, but high above beyond the altitude of his patrol, thin streaks of condensation begin to form. Contrails, faint, easy to miss. At Raboul, a third report arrives, this one more urgent in tone, though still uncertain in content. Forward observer reports multiple contrails at high altitude, estimated beyond standard engagement range. Inoue reads at his brow, tightening slightly. Multiple, he asks. Yes, sir. He considers this. Contrails mean altitude. Altitude means bombers, but beyond engagement range. He looks at the map again. The arc remains. It has always remained. Possibly high-altitude reconnaissance or ferry flights, he concludes. They will not approach further without fighter escort, and that in his mind settles the matter, because escort fighters cannot reach that far, because the rules of distance still apply. He places the report down. Maintain observation, he orders. No change to defensive posture. Outside, the sun climbs higher. The heat intensifies. Engines continue to hum. Aircraft continue their patrols. Everything proceeds as planned. Yet the warnings have begun. Small, uncertain, easy to explain away. Each one alone means little. Together they form a pattern that no one is yet willing to see. High above the Pacific, the contrails grow more defined, more numerous, moving steadily forward, toward a boundary that is no longer real. July 9th, 1943. 10:17 hours. Airspace north of Bougainville. The first sighting is almost accidental. Petty officer, First Class Hiroshi Watanabe, flying as wingman in Sakai's formation, tilts his head slightly as a flash of light catches his eye. It is faint high above, nearly lost in the brightness of the midday sky. At first, he thinks it is nothing more than sunlight reflecting off thin clouds. Then he sees it again. A sharper glint, metallic, moving. Zero Leader. This is. To Watanabe transmits. Possible contacts at high altitude. Bearing 090. There is a pause. Sakai adjusts his angles, squinting upward. For a moment, he sees nothing. Then slowly the shapes resolve. Tiny. Distant. Almost unreal. But there. Aircraft. More than one? Moving in formation. He feels a subtle tightening in his chest. Not fear, not yet, but something else. A disruption of expectation. Control, this is Zero Leader. Sakai says, his voice steady. Visual contact with multiple aircraft at high altitude. Request identification. The reply comes after a brief delay laced with static. Zero Leader, confirm altitude. Estimated above 6,000 meters, possibly higher. Another pause. Negative, known enemy. Operations at that range. The controller responds. Maintain observation. Maintain observation. The words feel inadequate. Sakai narrows his eyes, pushing the throttle forward slightly. His Zero begins to climb, the engine straining as it fights against gravity and thinning air. The aircraft is light agile, but it was never designed for sustained high-altitude interception. Not like this. Below, the ocean continues its endless motion, indifferent to what is unfolding above. Far ahead, the distant formation becomes clearer. Twin booms, long wings, distinct silhouettes that do not match any Japanese aircraft. Sakai recognizes them. Lightning fighters, he says quietly, almost to himself. Lockheed P-38. But they should not be here. Not this far. Not without carriers nearby. And not at this altitude in this number. Control. Sakai transmits again, urgency creeping into his voice. Enemy fighters confirmed. Multiple P-38 aircraft operating beyond expected range. This time the response is slower, more uncertain. Repeat, Zero leader. Enemy fighters at extreme range, Sakai says. They are inside our patrol zone. Inside. The word changes everything. At Rabaul, the operations room grows quieter as the message is relayed. Lieutenant Commander Inoue listens, his expression tightening. P-38s, he repeats. The signals officer nods. Yes, sir. Confirmed visual identification. Inoue steps closer to the map. That arc, that carefully drawn boundary. It is being crossed. How many, he asks. Estimate at least 12, possibly more. 12! Not a reconnaissance element. A formation. Deliberate. Inoue looks to another officer. Any reports of American carriers in the area? Negative, sir. Last confirmed positions place them well outside operational distance. Then how? The question hangs in the air, unanswered. Back in the sky, Sakai continues to climb, but the gap remains. The P-38s hold their altitude steady, controlled. They are not climbing. They are not maneuvering defensively. They are proceeding forward as if they know exactly where they are going. One of Sakai's wingmen speaks, his voice tense. They are not turning back. No, they are not. And then beyond them, more shapes begin to appear. Larger, slower. Bombers. A formation of consolidated B-24 Liberators, their broad wings casting faint shadows on the clouds below. They follow behind, the fighters protected, escorted, at a distance that should make such protection impossible. Sakai feels the shift fully now. This is not a mistake. This is not a probing flight. This is an operation. Control enemy bomber formation, confirmed, he reports. Escorted by long-range fighters. There is no immediate reply. On the ground, the implications begin to ripple outward. At Lakanai Airfield, ground crews pause, looking upward, as the distant hum of engines reaches them, faint but unmistakable. At the harbor, sailors shade their eyes, scanning the sky. On the bridge of Chokai, Vice Admiral Kusaka lowers his binoculars slowly. Report, he demands. An officer steps forward, breath quickening. Enemy aircraft have penetrated our defensive perimeter, sir. Fighter escort present. Kusaka's gaze sharpens. Impossible, he says. But even as the word leaves his mouth, the sound of engines grows louder. Not imagined. Not misidentified. Real, in the air. Sakai makes a decision. All units prepare to engage, he orders. Climb as much as possible. Target the bombers. His formation responds, engines roaring as they push beyond their comfortable limits. The Zeros climb, but they struggle. The altitude difference remains. The P-38s begin to descend slightly, positioning themselves between the Zeros and the bombers. Deliberate, controlled. They are not surprised. They are not reacting. They expected resistance. They planned for it. One of the American pilots, Captain Thomas Maguire, glances at his fuel gauge briefly. The external drop tanks remain attached, nearly empty now. He reaches down and flips the release switch. One by one, the tanks fall away, tumbling toward the ocean far below. The aircraft becomes lighter, faster, more responsive. He keys his radio. Escort group, prepare to engage interceptors. His voice is calm, confident, because he knows something his enemy does not. That the distance which once protected them no longer exists. The first tracers streak across the sky, bright lines cutting through blue. Sakai banks, hard evading a burst of fire that flashes past his canopy. The engagement has begun, and already the rules have changed. July 9th, 1943. 1,026 hours. Airspace above Bougainville and the northern Solomon Sea. The sky is no longer empty. It is filled with motion, with sound, with the violent intersection of machines that were never meant to meet at this distance. You can hear it now. The sharp crack of machine gun fire, the rising whine of engines pushed beyond their limits. The sudden rush of air as aircraft dive and climb in desperate arcs. Captain Saburo Sakai pulls hard on the control stick, his Zero shuddering as it strains upward. The aircraft is light responsive, but the altitude robs it of power. The engine labors the climb shallow, every meter gained costing precious speed. Above him, the Lockheed P-38 Lightnings hold the advantage. They dive with controlled precision, their twin engines roaring in unison. Their heavier frames give them momentum, their speed increasing as they descend into the Japanese formation. "Break left," Sakai shouts. A burst of tracers tears through the space where his wingman had been a moment before. The sky flashes with orange and white as rounds cut through air and fabric. Petty Officer Watanabe jerks his aircraft into a tight turn, barely avoiding the incoming fire. "They are faster," he says, his voice tight. "Faster, stronger in the dive. And they should not be here." Sakai glances upward again, just long enough to see the bombers maintaining formation. The consolidated B-24. Liberators move steadily forward, their defensive guns already tracking targets below. They are not turning back. They are not exposed. They are protected. Back at Rabaul, the operations room is no longer calm. Messages arrive in rapid succession, each one adding another layer of confusion. Enemy bombers confirmed over Bougainville. Fighter escort present at extended range. Multiple engagements in progress. Lieutenant Commander Masato Inoue stands over the map, his earlier certainty slipping. "How far inside our perimeter?" he demands. "Approximately 100 nautical miles, sir. Possibly more." That number lands heavily. "It should not be possible." "Where are their carriers?" another officer asks. No one answers, because the answer, if it exists, does not fit within the assumptions they have built their strategy upon. Vice Admiral Jinichi Kusaka steps into the room, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Report," he says. Inoue turns to him. "Enemy fighters and bombers have penetrated deep into our operational zone. Escort fighters are maintaining contact beyond expected range." Kusaka's eyes narrow. "Range is limited," he says. "They must withdraw soon." It is not a question. It is a statement, a belief. And it shapes the decision that follows. "Do not commit additional fighter reserves yet," Kusaka orders. "We will force them to expend fuel. Once they withdraw, we will pursue and destroy them." The logic is clear. Wait. Let distance do the work. Let the enemy overextend. But above Bougainville, the battle does not follow that logic. Captain Thomas Maguire banks his P-38, sharply lining up on a Zero that has just broken formation. His aircraft responds instantly, lighter now, without the drop tanks, its engines delivering full power. He squeezes the trigger. The nose-mounted guns erupt, a concentrated stream of fire tearing through the air. The Zero ahead jerks violently, smoke trailing from its wing. It begins to fall. Maguire does not watch it crash. He is already pulling up, scanning for the next target. "Escort group, maintain formation," he calls. "Do not chase too far. Discipline, control." They are not here to win a dogfight. They are here to ensure the bombers reach their objective. Below, Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura's bomber formation continues its steady advance. The aircraft shudder slightly as distant explosions ripple through the air. "Fighter engagement," above his co-pilot says. Nakamura nods, eyes fixed forward. "Maintain course," he replies. "They have orders. And those orders depend on something that would have been unthinkable not long ago. That their escorts can remain with them. That they will not be abandoned at the edge of an invisible line." Back in the fight, Sakai realizes the pattern. "They are not disengaging," he says over the radio. "They are staying with the bombers." A wingman responds, disbelief clear in his voice. "They should be low on fuel. They should be, but they are not." Another pass from a P-38 cuts through the formation. Tracers streak past Sakai's canopy. He rolls hard, the horizon spinning, the ocean and sky blending into a blur. His aircraft regains level flight, but the situation is changing rapidly. The Zeros are being pushed downward away from the bombers, separated, outmaneuvered, and still no sign of the enemy turning back. At Rabaul, more reports arrive. Enemy bombers approaching target area. Escort fighters still engaged. Fuel endurance appears greater than expected. Inoue looks at Kusaka. "They are not withdrawing," he says quietly. Kusaka does not respond immediately. He stares at the map at the arc that has defined their understanding of the battlefield. That arc is now meaningless. But he's not ready to accept that. Prepare reserve fighters, he orders finally. But hold them until the enemy begins to retreat. It is a decision rooted in the old reality, a reality that is already collapsing. Above Bougainville, the bombers begin their run. The formation tightens. Bomb bay doors open. The steady hum of engines is joined by the mechanical whir of release mechanisms preparing to drop their payload. Nakamura feels a sudden shift in the air. They are on target, his co-pilot says. Below installation's airfield supply depots, all within reach, all exposed. Sakai sees it too. They have reached the target, he says. The words carry something new now. Not confusion, not disbelief, but the first hint of something deeper, something more dangerous. The understanding that the assumptions they trusted are no longer protecting them, and that the enemy knows it. July 9th, 1943, 10:42 hours, Bougainville Island near Kahili Airfield. The first bombs fall with a sound that seems to tear the sky apart. A deep, rolling thunder follows as the formation of consolidated B-24 Liberators releases its payload. You can hear the whistle of falling metal growing louder, sharper, until it becomes a series of violent impacts that shake the earth itself. Runways crack, fuel dumps erupt into fire. Aircraft parked in neat rows are suddenly engulfed in explosions that send fragments spinning through the air. On the ground, Japanese personnel scatter, some diving for cover. Others frozen for a fraction too long as the realization arrives too late. The air fills with smoke thick and black, rising in columns that twist upward toward the bombers still overhead. Inside his cockpit, Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura feels the shockwaves even at altitude. The aircraft trembles slightly, then stabilizes as he maintains formation. Direct hits, his co-pilot says, looking down through the bombardier's sight. Multiple impacts across the airfield. Nakamura does not respond immediately. He is focused on holding position, on ensuring the bombs fall, as planned on completing a mission that has carried him far beyond what he once believed possible. Above them, the escort fighters remain. Still present, still engaged, still protecting. Captain Thomas Maguire scans the sky, his eyes moving constantly. A Zero dives toward the bombers attempting to break through. Maguire rolls into position, intercepting. He fires a short burst. The Zero pulls away, forced to abandon its approach. Stay with the formation, Maguire orders. Do not let them through. His voice carries certainty. Because now the distance has been proven irrelevant. The escort has not failed. The fighters have not turned back. They have remained exactly as planned. Below, the fires spread. At Kahili, ground crews attempt to respond, dragging hoses, shouting orders, but the scale of destruction is overwhelming. Fuel ignites in cascading bursts. Ammunition stores detonate with sharp, violent cracks. The airfield, once orderly and controlled, becomes chaos. And above it all, the bombers begin to turn, not to retreat in panic, but to complete their run and prepare for the return journey. At Rabaul, the reports arrive in fragments. Kahili, under heavy bombardment. Significant damage to airfield infrastructure. Enemy escort fighters still present. Lieutenant Commander Masato Inoue feels the weight of each message as it is read aloud. They have completed their strike, he says. The room is silent. Vice Admiral Jinichi Kusaka stands motionless, his gaze fixed on the map. They should be withdrawing, he says. But even as he speaks, another report arrives. Enemy aircraft maintaining formation. No indication of immediate retreat. No indication. The words linger, because they confirm what no one wants to say aloud. The enemy has not reached the limit of their range. They are still operating, still in control, still capable. Inoue steps closer to the map, tracing the estimated flight path with his finger. They have penetrated beyond 150 nautical miles inside our perimeter, he says. Possibly more. Kusaka turns to him. That is not possible, he says again. But this time the words lack conviction. Because the evidence is no longer theoretical. It is burning on the ground at Kahili. It is flying overhead unchallenged. It is happening. Above Bougainville, Sakai pulls his Zero into another climb, his engines straining. He watches as the bombers begin to turn away from the target. They are leaving, one of his wingmen says. Relief flickers briefly, but it is short-lived. Because the escort fighters remain between them and the bombers, maintaining their protective screen. They are still covered, Sakai replies. And then he sees something else. The formation is not disorganized, not hurried. The turn is smooth, controlled. Planned, they are not escaping. They are completing their mission. Sakai feels it then fully. Not just surprise, not just confusion, but the recognition that something fundamental has changed. They had enough fuel, he says quietly. No one responds. Because there is nothing to say. The assumption that defined their strategy has just been broken. At Rabaul, Kusaka finally gives the order. Launch reserve fighters, he says. Intercept and pursue. The command is issued with urgency now, but it carries a delay that cannot be undone. At Lakunai, airfield engines roar to life as additional Zero fighters prepare for takeoff. Pilots rush to their aircraft, climbing into cockpits, strapping in, pushing throttles forward. But time has already passed. Distance has already been crossed. The opportunity to intercept at the edge of range has already been lost. In the air, Maguire glances at his fuel gauge again. The internal tanks still hold enough. Enough to fight. Enough to return. He keys his radio. Escort group, maintain position. We stay with the bombers until clear. There is no hesitation, no doubt. Because the plan accounted for this. Because the engineers, the planners, the quiet calculations made far from the front lines have changed the reality of this moment. The drop tanks are gone, but their effect remains. They carried the fighters here. They extended the reach. They erased the boundary. Below, the fires continue to burn. Above, the formation moves steadily away. And in Rabaul, the realization begins to take shape. Not fully accepted, not yet spoken, but impossible to ignore. The war they thought they understood is no longer the war they are fighting. July 9th, 1943. 11:03 hours. Skies south of Bougainville over the Solomon Sea. The sound of engines does not fade. It grows more distant, but it does not disappear. That is what unsettles them most. Captain Saburo Sakai steadies his Zero after another failed climb. His breathing controlled but heavier now. Sweat runs down his face, stinging his eyes, but he does not wipe it away. His focus remains fixed ahead. The American formation is still there, still intact, still moving with purpose. They should be breaking apart by now. One of his wingmen says over the radio, voice strained, "They should be low on fuel." Sakai does not answer immediately, because he knows they are not. He has seen it with his own eyes. The escort fighters have not weakened. They have not scattered. They have not abandoned the bombers. They are still protecting them. Maintain distance. Sakai finally says, "Do not overextend." The words feel unfamiliar, cautious, measured, because now, for the first time, the risk is not just the enemy. It is the unknown. Above the returning bombers, Captain Thomas Maguire keeps his formation tight. His eyes move constantly, scanning for threats, tracking the Japanese fighters that hover at the edge of engagement range. "They are holding back," one of his pilots says. Maguire nods slightly. "They are waiting for us to run out of fuel," he replies. There is a brief pause, but we are not going to. The confidence in his voice is quiet, but absolute. Behind him, the formation of B-24 bombers continues its steady course. Engines hum in synchronized rhythm, a deep mechanical chorus that carries across the sky. Inside his cockpit, Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura watches the escort fighters with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "They are still here," his co-pilot says again, as if repeating it might make it more understandable. Nakamura nods slowly. Yes, no further explanation, because none exists that fits what they were taught. Below, the ocean stretches endlessly, a vast expanse that once defined the limits of everything they could do. Now it feels smaller, less protective. At Rabaul, the operations room is no longer orderly. Voices overlap. Messages arrive faster than they can be processed. Reserve fighters launching from Lakunai. Enemy formation turning southeast. Estimated fuel endurance exceeds previous calculations. Lieutenant Commander Masato Inoue moves between stations, trying to impose structure on the chaos. Plot their course, he orders. Determine their return vector. An officer shakes his head. "We do not have sufficient data, sir. Their range is beyond our models." Beyond our models? The phrase echoes, because it confirms what no one wants to admit. The enemy is operating outside the boundaries they understood. Vice Admiral Jinichi Kusaka stands near the center of the room, his posture rigid. "Where are our interceptors?" he demands. "They are still climbing, sir," comes the reply. "They will not reach the enemy formation for several minutes." Several minutes. In this moment, it might as well be an hour. Kusaka clenches his jaw. We must engage them before they reach open water, he says. Once they are beyond our range, they will escape. The irony is not lost on anyone in the room, because the concept of range is no longer behaving as expected. In the air, the newly launched Zero fighters from Lakunai struggle to gain altitude. Their engines roar, but the climb is slow. The distance to the enemy still significant. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka leads the group, his voice urgent. Increase climb rate, he orders. We must intercept before they withdraw. But even as he speaks, he can see the problem. The American formation is already moving away. Not rapidly, not desperately, but steadily. With control, with confidence. Above them, Maguire hears the distant radio chatter of his squadron. Additional enemy fighters approaching from the north. He glances at his fuel gauge again. Still sufficient, still within margins. Maintain escort, he says. We engage only if necessary. His pilots acknowledge. There is no panic, no sense of being trapped. Because they know they can stay. Because they know they can leave. Because the calculations have already been done. Sakai watches the new group of Zeros attempting to close the distance. They will not make it in time, he says quietly. One of his wingmen responds, frustration clear. We should pursue now. Press the attack. Sakai shakes his head, though the gesture is unseen. If we chase too far, we may not return, he says. The words hang heavily. Because now the limitation applies only to one side. At Rabaul, another report arrives. Enemy formation approaching outer perimeter. No signs of fuel distress. Inoue reads it, then looks up at Kusaka. They are leaving at full strength, he says. Kusaka does not respond immediately. He stares at the map at the lines that no longer hold meaning. Signal all units, he says finally. Pursue to maximum safe range. The order is given, but it carries hesitation. Because what is safe range now? No one is certain. In the sky, the gap widens. The American formation moves farther from Bougainville, farther from the burning airfield, farther from the interceptors that cannot quite reach them. Maguire looks back once, seeing the distant shapes of Japanese fighters falling behind. He does not smile. He does not celebrate. He simply notes it. They cannot follow, he says. And in that statement lies the full weight of what is changed. Below, the ocean continues its endless motion. Above, the formation flies on. And behind them, confusion spreads, growing deeper with every passing minute. July 9th, 1943. 11:38 hours. Rabaul Harbor and surrounding airspace. The sky is quieter now. Not silent, but emptied of the violence that had filled it less than an hour ago. The echoes of gunfire have faded. The contrails have begun to dissipate. Only faint traces remain, thin white scars across the blue already dissolving into nothing. But the consequences remain. They are arriving in fragments, in reports, in the faces of officers who no longer move with the same certainty. In the operations room, Lieutenant Commander Masato Inoue stands motionless as another message is read aloud. Kahili Airfield reports severe damage. Runway unusable. Multiple aircraft destroyed on the ground. Fuel storage ignited. Casualties significant. The words are clinical, measured, but their meaning is not. Inoue lowers his head, slightly absorbing it. Secondary strikes confirmed, he asks. Negative, sir. Enemy formation has exited engagement zone. No additional waves detected. No additional waves, because none were needed. Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka steps forward, his presence commanding attention even in the strained atmosphere. They struck once, he says quietly. No one responds, because the implication is clear. They struck once, and it was enough. Outside, the harbor remains deceptively calm. Ships sit anchored in their positions, their crews moving with forced normalcy. But you can feel the tension now. A subtle shift in how men walk, how they speak, how they look toward the horizon. Something has changed. And everyone senses it. At Lakunai Airfield, the returning Zero fighters begin to land. One by one, they touch down, wheels hitting the runway with sharp, jarring impacts. Captain Saburo Sakai is among them. He taxis to a stop engine, idling, then cuts power. The sudden silence inside the cockpit feels unnatural after the sustained roar of combat. He removes his headset slowly. A ground crewman approaches, his expression uncertain. "Captain, were you able to intercept them?" he asks. Sakai looks at him for a moment before answering. "Number." The word is simple. "Final." He climbs out of the aircraft boots, hitting the ground with a dull thud. Around him, other pilots are doing the same, their movements slower, heavier. They exchange glances, but few words, because there is nothing to explain. They all saw it. They all felt it. The enemy came farther than expected, struck with precision, and left without suffering the losses that should have been inevitable. At the far end of the airfield, Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka's group returns as well. Their aircraft show signs of strain engines, pushed hard fuel levels dangerously low. One of the pilots removes his goggles, his face pale. "We almost did not make it back," he says. Tanaka nods, and we still did not reach them. Back in Rabaul, the analysis begins. Officers gather around the map. Not with the confidence of planners, but with the urgency of men trying to understand what has just happened. They launched from Guadalcanal, one officer suggests. Possibly extended staging. That distance exceeds known fighter range, another replies, unless they carried additional fuel. The room grows quiet. Additional fuel. The idea is not new, but it has never been considered decisive. Not until now. Inoue turns to the signals officer. "Any reports of external fuel tanks?" he asks. The officer hesitates. "There were mentions from pilots," he says. "Objects falling from enemy aircraft during engagement, cylindrical in shape." Inoue's eyes narrow. "They discarded them," he says, "not as debris, but as part of a system, a method, a solution." Vice Admiral Kusaka listens, his expression unreadable. "How far did the escort fighters remain with the bombers?" he asks. "Until withdrawal," Sir Inoue replies. They did not disengage prematurely. Kusaka looks at the map again. The arc is still there, drawn in pencil, but now it is meaningless, a line that no longer defines anything. "Our defensive strategy assumes limited enemy range," he says slowly. No one interrupts, because they all know what comes next. That assumption is no longer valid. The words settle heavily over the room, because they do not just describe a single failure. They describe the collapse of an entire way of thinking. At Kahili, the fires continue to burn. Smoke rises into the sky, visible for miles. The airfield is no longer operational. Aircraft that once stood ready are now twisted wreckage. Fuel that once powered missions now feeds the flames. Ground crews move through the destruction, searching for survivors, assessing damage, but the scale is overwhelming. One officer stands near the shattered remains of a hangar, his uniform stained with soot. "They came from beyond our reach," he says to no one in particular, "and we could not stop them." Back in the air, far to the southeast, the American formation continues its return. The bombers hold steady. The escort fighters remain in position. Captain Thomas Maguire checks his instruments again. Fuel levels are within expected limits. Everything has gone according to plan. He keys his radio. "Maintain formation. We stay together until we are clear." His voice remains calm, controlled, because for him this is not a surprise. This is the result of preparation, of calculation, of solving a problem that others believed was fixed. Behind him, the Pacific stretches endlessly, but it no longer protects. It no longer limits. It is simply distance, and distance has been overcome. At Rabaul, Kusaka gives a new order. "Re-evaluate all operational plans," he says. "Assume extended enemy range in future engagements. The command is necessary, but it comes after the fact, after the strike, after the loss, after the moment when it might have mattered most." Inoue writes it down, his hand steady, but his thoughts racing, because he understands something now that he did not before. The enemy did not just attack. They changed the battlefield, and the original plan built on certainty has collapsed. July 9th, 1943. 13:00, 6 hours. Rabaul Operations Command and surrounding airfields. The heat has intensified. By early afternoon, the airfield's heavier, as if the atmosphere itself is pressing down on the island. Sweat clings to uniforms. Paper maps curl slightly at the edges. The fans continue to turn, but they offer no real relief. Inside the operations room, the pace has not slowed. If anything, it has become more frantic. Damage reports from Kahili continue to arrive, a signals officer says, reading from a growing stack of messages. Runway remains unusable. Repair estimates unknown. Fuel reserves critically reduced. Lieutenant Commander Masato Inoue nods, though his attention is already shifting. "Reassign available aircraft to alternate fields," he orders. "Disperse remaining assets. We cannot risk concentration." The order is immediate, reactive. Because the previous arrangement, the careful positioning of forces based on assumed safety, has already been exposed as vulnerable. Across the room, another officer speaks. Reconnaissance aircraft have been launched to track enemy withdrawal route. Inoue turns. Any contact? Negative so far, sir. Estimated they are already beyond interception range. Beyond interception range. Now the phrase applies in reverse. Vice Admiral Jinichi Kusaka stands near the window looking out toward the harbor. His posture remains rigid, but there is a stillness to him now. A quiet calculation replacing the earlier certainty. We must determine how they achieve this range, he says. Not why. How? Because understanding the mechanism is the only path to adapting. An engineering problem. But the answer will not come quickly enough. At Lakunai Airfield, mechanics work with urgency that borders on desperation. Aircraft are refueled, rearmed, inspected. Pilots gather in small groups, speaking in low voices, replaying the engagement in fragments. Captain Saburo Sakai stands apart, his gaze fixed on the horizon. They carried fuel externally, he says to Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, who has approached him. Tanaka nods. I saw them drop something before engaging. Drop tanks, Sakai replies. The words feel unfamiliar on his tongue, not because he does not know the concept, but because he has never seen it applied with such effect. They extended their range, Tanaka says. Sakai looks at him. They erased it, he corrects. The distinction matters. Because extending a limit is one thing, removing it entirely is another. Nearby, a junior pilot speaks up, his voice uncertain. If they can reach us, once they can do it again. No one argues, because the evidence is already burning in Kahili. At Rabaul, the attempt to respond takes shape. Prepare long-range reconnaissance flights. Inoue orders. We need confirmation of enemy staging areas. An officer hesitates. Our reconnaissance aircraft lack the range to follow them fully, sir. Inoue closes his eyes briefly. Another limitation, another boundary. Then extend their patrol as far as possible, he says. We must gather something. The orders are given, but they feel insufficient, because they are still operating within the old framework, still constrained, still limited. And now those limits are a disadvantage. On the ground at Kahili, the situation remains dire. Fire crews continue to battle the flames, but much of the damage is already done. Twisted metal litters the airfield. Craters scar the runway. The smell of burned fuel and scorched earth hangs thick in the air. An officer walks the length of what was once a taxiway, his boots crunching over debris. This will take days to repair, he says. Another shakes his head. If we have days. Because now the question is not whether the enemy can return. It is when, far to the southeast, the American formation continues its journey back toward Guadalcanal. The sky is calmer here. The tension has eased but not disappeared. Captain Thomas Maguire maintains his position, his aircraft steady, his focus unchanged. Fuel check, he calls. One by one, his pilots respond. All within limits. No issues. Continuing as planned. The consistency is striking. Because this is not a narrow escape. This is a controlled operation, a demonstration of capability. Behind them, the bombers remain intact. Their mission completed, their return path secure. Inside his cockpit, Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura exhales slowly. We made it, his co-pilot says. Nakamura nods, but his expression is thoughtful. They expected us to fail, he says. The co-pilot looks at him. But we did not. Because something fundamental changed. And the enemy did not anticipate it. Back at Rabaul, Kusaka turns from the window. Prepare defensive adjustments, he orders. Increase patrol radius. Extend early warning coverage. Inoue writes quickly, but he hesitates before speaking. Sir? Even with extended patrols, we may not detect them in time, he says. Kusaka looks at him. Then we must assume they are already on their way. The statement lands heavily, because it removes the comfort of warning. It replaces it with constant threat. At Lakunai, Sakai watches as another group of aircraft prepares for takeoff. They are reacting, Tanaka says. Yes, Sakai replies. But we are reacting to something that has already happened. He looks back toward the north, where the sky is now empty. They have already shown us what they can do, and showing is enough. Because it forces change. Because it creates uncertainty. Because it breaks confidence. In the operations room, the map is updated. New lines are drawn. New estimates are calculated. But they are based on incomplete understanding, on a reality that has shifted faster than they can adapt. Inoue steps back, looking at the revised positions. "We are adjusting," he says quietly. Kusaka nods. "But we are behind." The words are simple, unavoidable, because the enemy has already moved beyond the point where these adjustments could have prevented what has already occurred. Outside, the afternoon sun continues to burn. The harbor remains still, but the calm is no longer reassuring. It is fragile, temporary, because now everyone understands that the next strike may already be forming beyond the horizon. And this time, they will not be surprised, but that does not mean they will be ready. July 9th, 1943. 16:20 hours. Rabaul Naval Command Headquarters. The afternoon light begins to soften, casting long shadows across the harbor. The heat lingers, but something else has settled over the base now. A quiet, not the calm from the morning. A different kind, one that follows shock. Inside the operations room, the noise has faded. The urgency of earlier hours has given way to something slower, heavier. Reports are still being processed, but the pace has changed. There is no longer an attempt to keep up. Now there is only an attempt to understand. Lieutenant Commander Masato Inoue stands over the central table, a series of new calculations laid out before him. Numbers, distances, fuel estimates, aircraft performance data. All of it revised. All of it wrong, at least in its previous form. He traces a line across the map. "From Guadalcanal to Kahili," he says quietly. "With external fuel, a P-38 can escort bombers to the target and return." No one interrupts, because they have already seen it happen. Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka listens without moving. "And if they stage from forward positions," Inoue continues, "their effective range extends even further." Further. The word carries no comfort now. It only expands the problem. An officer nearby speaks, his voice low. That places Rabaul within reach. The room remains silent, because that conclusion is unavoidable, not theoretical, not speculative, within reach. Kusaka finally turns from the map. "How long until they can strike again?" he asks. Inoue hesitates. "We cannot determine that precisely, sir," he says. "If they have sufficient aircraft and fuel reserves, they could repeat the operation at any time." Any time. The phrase settles into the room like a weight, because it removes the last sense of control. Earlier distance provided warning. Now it does not. Earlier range defined safety. Now it does not. Everything that structured their expectations has shifted. At Lakunai Airfield, Captain Saburo Sakai sits on an ammunition crate helmet resting beside him. The sounds of repair crews carry faintly across the field, but they feel distant, muted. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka approaches holding a canteen. They are updating patrol patterns, Tanaka says, handing it to him. Sakai takes a drink, then nods. "It will not matter," he says. Tanaka frowns slightly. "We will see them sooner next time." Sakai looks at him. And then what? The question lingers, because seeing is not the same as stopping. "They stayed with the bombers the entire time," Sakai continues. "They did not hesitate. They did not withdraw." Tanaka nods slowly. "They trusted their range." "Yes," Sakai says. He looks out toward the horizon again. "And we trusted that they could not." That is the difference. That is the moment. Back in the operations room, Inoue begins to list the implications one by one. Forward airfields are no longer secure. Concentrated aircraft are vulnerable to single strike missions. Escort fighters can accompany bombers deeper than previously believed. Each statement is precise, measured, and devastating. Kusaka listens to each one, his expression unchanged, but his silence growing heavier. "What of our own capabilities?" he asks. Inoue hesitates again. "Our current fighter aircraft lack equivalent range, sir," he says. "Even with modifications, we cannot match their escort distance." The imbalance is clear. One side has extended its reach. The other has not. An officer at the far end of the room speaks almost reluctantly. They have turned distance into an advantage. No one corrects him, because that is exactly what has happened. Not by chance, not by accident, but through deliberate effort, through engineering, through solving a problem that was assumed to be fixed. At Kahili, the fires have begun to die down, leaving behind smoldering wreckage and scorched ground. The airfield is quiet now, but it is a broken quiet. An officer walks past the remains of a destroyed bomber, its fuselage twisted, its wings torn apart. He stops, looking at the damage. "They came from beyond our reach," he says again. But this time the meaning is different, because now he understands. It is not that they came from far away. It is that the idea of far away no longer protects anything. Far to the southeast, the American formation reaches safer skies. The tension eases, but discipline remains. Captain Thomas Maguire glances back once more. No pursuit, no interception, nothing behind them. Escort group maintain course, he says. His voice remains steady. Because for him the mission has confirmed something important. Not just that they can reach the target, but that they can do so repeatedly, reliably, predictably. The distance is no longer a barrier. It is a pathway. Back at Rabaul, the realization settles fully. Kusaka looks at the map one last time, then reaches out and places his hand over the penciled arc that once defined their defensive boundary. He pauses. Then slowly he erases part of it with his thumb. The graphite smears across the paper, the line fading, losing its shape. This line no longer exists, he says. No one argues, because it is already gone. Not on the map, but in reality. And that is where it matters. July 10th, 1943. 0710 hours, Rabaul Harbor, New Britain. The morning returns, but it is not the same morning. The light spreads across the harbor in the same slow way, touching the decks of ships, the roofs of buildings, the runways of airfields that still function. The sea moves with the same steady rhythm. The sky is clear again, open and wide, and yet everything feels altered. You can hear the engine starting once more, but the sound carries tension now. Every ignition, every rising hum feels like preparation for something that might already be coming. On the bridge of the cruiser, Chokai Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka stands in the same position he held the previous day. His posture is unchanged, his uniform remains immaculate, but his gaze is different. It no longer rests on the horizon with quiet certainty. Now it searches. Because the horizon no longer mocks safety. Below, officers move with efficiency, but their movements are sharper, less relaxed. Orders are issued quickly. Responses come without hesitation. Extend patrol radius by 20%, one officer says. Adjust reconnaissance vectors to cover southeastern approach, another adds. The commands continue layered, overlapping, urgent. But they are all responses, adjustments made after the fact. At Lakunai Airfield, the damage from the previous day has not reached here, but its impact is still visible. Aircraft are no longer parked in neat rows. They are dispersed, spaced apart, hidden where possible. Ground crews move faster. Pilots check their instruments with greater care. Captain Saburo Sakai stands beside his Zero, running his hand along the metal surface. The aircraft is unchanged, but its role is not. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka approaches. They have increased patrol assignments, he says. Sakai nods. They will keep increasing them, he replies. Tanaka looks at him. Do you think it will be enough? Sakai does not answer immediately. He looks up at the sky, clear and empty. No, he says finally. The word is quiet. Certain, because the problem is not patrol coverage. It is reach, and that has already been decided. At Kahili, the airfield remains scarred. Engineers and labor crews work to clear debris, to fill craters, to restore what they can. But the process is slow. Too slow. An officer walks along the damaged runway, measuring, calculating. We can make it operational in several days, he says. Another shakes his head. If they return before then, it will not matter. The risk is constant now. Not theoretical, not distant, immediate. Back at Rabaul, the operations room continues its work. Lieutenant Commander Masato Inoue stands before a revised map. The old arc is gone, replaced by overlapping zones, extended patrol lines, uncertain estimates. All forward positions are to assume vulnerability, he says. No location is beyond enemy reach. The officers around him nod, because they have already accepted it, not willingly, but completely. Vice Admiral Kusaka enters his presence, silencing the room. Status, he says. Inoue turns. Defensive adjustments are in progress, sir. Patrols extended, aircraft dispersed, reconnaissance increased. Kusaka listens. And the enemy, he asks. Inoue hesitates. We have no confirmed sightings this morning. Kusaka nods slowly. That does not mean they are not there. No one disagrees. Because now absence of evidence is not reassurance. It is uncertainty. Far to the southeast at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, the American aircraft that carried out the strike are being serviced. Ground crews move with practiced efficiency, refueling, rearming, inspecting. The Lockheed P-38 fighters stand in line once more, their external hardpoints ready. Another set of dropped tanks is brought forward, large, simple. decisive. Captain Thomas Maguire stands beside his aircraft speaking with a crew chief. "Any issues from the last mission?" he asks. "None, sir," the crew chief replies. "All systems performed within expected parameters." Maguire nods. "Prepare for next sortie." The words are routine, because for him this is now routine. The distance has been solved, and once solved, it remains solved. Back at Rabaul, Kusaka walks to the map again. He studies the new lines, the expanded zones, the revised calculations. They are more accurate, more realistic, but they are also reactive. "They will come again," he says. Inoue nods. "Yes, sir." Kusaka's gaze remains fixed on the map. "And when they do, we will meet them." The statement is firm, but it lacks something. Not confidence, but certainty of outcome. Because now the balance has shifted. The enemy can choose when to strike, where to strike, how far to go. And that freedom changes everything. Outside, the harbor remains calm. The ships are still. The sky is clear. But the calm is no longer protective. It is deceptive. Because somewhere beyond that horizon, engines will start again. Fuel will flow into tanks. Orders will be given. And aircraft will rise into the sky, carrying with them a range that no longer respects distance. At Kahili, a single aircraft is moved slowly across the damaged field, its path uneven, its future uncertain. At Lakunai, pilots climb into cockpits, knowing that the sky above them is no longer defined by the limits they once trusted. At Rabaul, officers continue to adjust plans that are already behind the reality they face. And across the Pacific, the distance that once shaped the war has been transformed, not removed, but mastered. Too late to prevent what has already happened. Too late to return to what was.